I'm CALLIE BRETTHAUER with a special edition of In Your Neighborhood. Tonight, we are covering a special forum hosted by the Iowa Citizen Action Network. They are hosting a forum where speakers will discuss a variety of progressive issues from small businesses to retired Americans. And among these speakers is Senator Bernie Sanders, the longest-serving independent senator in the United States. Let's go inside and check it out. So could you tell us a little bit more about Iowa Citizen Action Network?
Sure. ICAN has been around for about 35 years. We work on uniting people around progressive political issues. We have about 7,000 members around the state, and we have affiliated organizations. And we believe that by working in coalition, we build power and can achieve the goals that we would like.
Why did you decide to come out to this event tonight?
Bernie Sanders is a guy who, in my view, in my humble opinion, has been one of the few people leading in Washington, D.C. with sane ideas and sane views on how much we need to change the system, and that the system is basically not working anymore.
So what issues are really important to you, especially with the election coming up?
The environment, healthcare, the economy. For Bernie, probably, I'd like to see, even a more progressive healthcare system. I know he would like to see that. And then somebody has to address global warming at some point. Sure, he won't talk about the presidential race. He's very independent. He won't say anything too much about the Democrats. I'd like to hear him comment on his the senators that he works with in the Republican side. I've heard him talk a little bit about that in the past. That'd be fun.
Some of the issues that we feel are most important are raising the minimum wage. The thought that people are trying to survive on $7.25 an hour is ridiculous. And we also are working on tax fairness. And we work a lot with small business owners around the state, and they don't have the opportunity to move their corporate headquarters to Canada or to some other country to avoid paying taxes in the United States. So we think of them basically as corporate deserters.
Have you seen him speak before? Is this going to be your first time?
I've never seen him speak before, but I have read a lot about what he's written. I have quoted him many times on my Facebook, and I find him to be an amazing person.
ICAN had co-sponsored the events with Senator Sanders when he was in Iowa back on September 14th, I believe it was. And I was so impressed with his speaking that I got in touch with his his people, and asked if there was a possibility that he would do an event with us. And they just happened to be here in Iowa City and said they'd be glad to do one. So we'd also like to thank our hosts tonight. We have Joe Bolcom, Carolyn Jim Christensen, Allison J.P. Clausen, Judith Gilmore, Mary Noble, Carmen Smith, and Mary Traxel. So thank you for supporting us this evening. So what does ICAN do? Well, what we do best is speak up for the 99% who can't afford a high-priced lobbyist, yet who have a stake in what's going on, both at the state and federal level. We believe in working in coalition and partnership with other organizations and individuals. We subscribe to the philosophy that we all do better when we all do better. Here in Iowa, we'll always fight for strategic public investments in education, healthcare, transportation, natural resources, and human services. All of these things that make our state a desirable place to live and create a healthy environment for economic growth. And nationally, we work with state and national partners on tax fairness issues, shining a light on campaign finance, corporate inversions, corporate welfare, you know the drill. And then there's the minimum wage. Whether at the state or federal level, it must be raised. It is unconscionable that politicians think an individual, let alone a family, can even exist on our current pitiable minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. We must raise the wage. We're also committed to fighting for justice on our courts. At the federal level, we've taken on a leading role in the formation of the Iowa Fair Courts Coalition. We know that courts without judges deny Americans their access to justice. And in Iowa, we work with our friends at Justice Not Politics to keep Iowa's judiciary from the necessity of answering to campaign contributors and ideological groups instead of answering to the law. We also understand the concerns of small business owners, and we continue to build our organizing project, the Iowa Main Street Alliance, to make sure the true voice of small business is heard on all issues. In other words, we continually push with our partners and friends, and the work never ends. We are not afraid to jump into the fight, taking opportunities in all that we do to develop and activate our members, small business owners, partners, and friends to make our state and our nation a better place to live. So looking ahead, we're going to continue to fight for our vision of prosperity for working families in the middle class. It's our future, our nation's future and our family's future that's at stake, not millionaires and CEO campaign contributors. So we're fighting for a path to prosperity for working families and the middle class. We're fighting for fair taxes, no benefit cuts to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, raising the minimum wage, creating good jobs for America, putting teachers and firefighters, caregivers, and young people to work. We know that's how we can rev up the middle class engine and move our economy forward. So why do we do these things? Not because we've been hungry or homeless or an immigrant, not because we've had a case before the federal courts or because we're living on Social Security, not because we're a minority, a woman, a gay or lesbian individual, not because we're living on $15,000 a year. We do it because it's the right thing to do. We truly believe that every person has inherent human worth. We're all in this together. We all benefit from decisions which serve the common good and of government for and by the people. So as we move forward, we're going to continue to honor Iowa Citizen Action Network's 35-year history of creating social change in Iowa and across the nation. And we can't do it without you. So we appreciate your donations of time and of your time and funds. It's this ongoing support that allows us to work every day to live up to our mission and our vision. So now on to the show. You didn't come here to listen to me, did you? We have a panel here tonight. We're going to talk about a few issues. We're going to keep them to like 3 minutes apiece. And then to the main attraction, Senator Sanders. So first we're going to have Norm STERZENBACH from the Alliance for Retired Americans, and then RESHONDA Young, owner of Popcorn Heaven, who provided the popcorn here tonight. And last but not least, Chris SCHWARTZ of Americans for Democratic Action.
Thank you, Sue. Before I get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a former, in a former life, I was a BA of a local union in Cedar Rapids with a membership at Rockwell Collins, or Collins Radio, as some of you older folks might remember it. We had 4,300 members at the time I was directing things there. My stepfather was a bookie. He's dead, and everyone who would take offense, they're also dead. So I can tell you that. The only reason I say that is because it has some bearing on some things we'll be talking about later. The only reason I'm mentioning that here is that I will be. I hope it will add credit when I give you some facts and opinions on Social Security issues, as I used to deal with the same kind of stuff when we negotiated contracts relative to pensions with Rockwell. And as far as knowing how a bookie works, that's very similar to the way actuaries work. They'll tell you the odds of something will happen or something won't happen. They won't tell you that. In fact, if you want to get underneath their skin, just call them. Just tell them that they're acting like a bookie, and that will really irritate them. Believe me, I've got firsthand experience on that. There's a large number of folks in how many are here from Johnson County? Almost everyone. Well, I planned on having Johnson County being all of everyone. Social Security currently, well, when you start to look for data, you try to find data sets that are complete, and the closest I could find to a complete data set was 2012. So before anyone gets irritated and says, well, that's old data, it's very similar to the 2011 data, and it's very similar, I think, to the 2013 data, which the senator might have access to. In any event, you could probably project it forward by saying the numbers here will be a little bit higher because of inflation, et cetera. They were a little bit lower for 2011. In any event, in Johnson County, Social Security provided $245,124,000 worth of benefits in the year 2013. Now that's a substantial portion of the income in all of Johnson County. So if you were to lose Social Security, you can see how that could have an impact on the income for virtually everyone that buys and sells anything in Johnson County. Preparing for the talk, I had the good fortune to look up Social Security on the internet. You'd be surprised how many times one of the Iowa Senate candidates comes up when you input Social Security and you ask about it. Apparently, what the candidate had said before doesn't count, but most of the articles were talking about how to explain what she was talking about now in the last debate, which has very little connection with anything in the real world that I could tell. In any event, Johnson County has a very big stake in making sure that Social Security is continued to pay to our folks. Social Security was, when it was passed, it originally raised a large number of folks out of poverty, mostly old folks. When you turned 65 and you retired, got your gold watch, you went right straight to the poorhouse. That's the way it used to be. Right now, there's an unusually high number of retirees that are poor. If we were to do away with Social Security, that would triple or quadruple. I took and looked at my own pension and did some comparison. And if we were to lose Social Security, I would take a 54% cut in income. Now, that don't sound like much to some of you folks that are used to hearing big numbers in the past, but it would mean I would have to change not only how much I contribute in politics and stuff, but it would change how I paid for things. I would have to give up eating. I would have to give up driving. There's a few things that I would have to give up in order just to pay the rent. Now, when I was working at one of the higher paid jobs in the plant, and my Social Security and my pension were similarly situated. So I'm in better shape than most of the folks that I worked with. So I know for a fact that if it's going to cause a 54% reduction in my pension or my income, retirement income, it would be a lot more disastrous for anyone else who was working with me in the plant. Sue, were you going to introduce the next person?
Nope, RESHONDA.
Thank you, everyone. Again, my name is RESHONDA Young. I'm from Waterloo and am the owner of Popcorn Heaven. Before I started Popcorn Heaven, which was in February of this year, I worked with my dad in his small businesses, which I actually still do work with him.
Can you hold the microphone closer?
Like this? Oh, that's better. Okay. So I still work with my dad in his small businesses, and so what I will tell you is that at Popcorn Heaven, I made a commitment when I was starting it that I would pay my people more than minimum wage. Actually, that I would pay them at least $11 an hour was what the commitment was. And I'll tell you as well, my dad also in his two businesses pays his people, more than minimum wage, more than $10 an hour for everyone. And he's been around for 25 years. So all the politicians and organizations that are saying that this is going to be a hardship on small businesses, it's more of a hardship on them and the corporate giants who do not want to cut into any of their profits, and they're putting their profits before their people. So at Popcorn Heaven, we're doing well, even with paying people, more than minimum wage. And at Alpha, we're doing well, more than paying people paying people more than minimum wage. Knowing that minimum wage is, only $15,080 a year if you're working full time, the only way that you're not considered below the poverty line is if you are a household of one. And that is not usual, and even at a household of one, you're still struggling with that. So paying people more than minimum wage, absolutely, it helps small businesses like mine because it gives people more money, and with more money, they actually spend it. At businesses like ours, we get people who come in on a regular basis and say, are you going to accept EBT cards? Basically, will you accept food stamps? I can't. I tried, but my business is not qualified to accept food stamps. So that tells you right there that even a small business like mine would benefit from a wage increase with people, because there are a lot of people who would love to come, but they just can't afford it. So absolutely, we need to raise the minimum wage, and we need to keep putting people before profits and politics.
Thank you, RESHONDA. I'm Chris Schwartz with Americans for Democratic Action. Our office is up in Waterloo. I'm really happy to be down here in Coralville tonight. I'm here to talk about the work we've been doing on taxes with our friends here at ICAN as well as our friends at ICCI. And the reason why we're working on taxes is because the promise of America should be for everyone, not just the wealthy few. Corporations and their CEOs are now making 300 times what the pay of the average worker is making, while many of us have gotten no raise at all. Corporations and the wealthy can afford to pay their fair share of taxes so more of us can have an opportunity to succeed. Millions of Americans are working harder than ever, and yet they keep falling behind. Families are struggling, and the middle class is rapidly shrinking. It's almost gone. The deck is definitely stacked against us, and the system is rigged in favor of the wealthy and the big corporations. We have a tax system that you hear about how complicated the tax code is. Well, why the hell is the tax code so complicated? The lobbyists made it so complicated by putting in all these loopholes that they know exactly what to find so that they can get the tax breaks that they need to. So it's their fault. They created this. And so wealthy and big corporations like General Electric, Verizon, and Apple have used their lobbyists and their campaign contributions to really get a tax system that's very much in their favor and get away with paying nothing to next to nothing in taxes. We also have this issue of tax inversion. How many people have heard about tax inversion recently? You all heard about Burger King, right? Burger King's the most recent one. Walgreens was right before that. What tax inversion is a tax maneuver that allows you to renounce your U.S. corporate citizenship by buying a company in a foreign country. So for this example of Burger King, they're buying Hortons in Canada. And they're most likely going to they'll have to vote on the shareholders, they'll have to vote on this in January. But they'll move their tax headquarters there so they can avoid paying taxes in the United States. Well, Burger King needs to pay their taxes here because they pay poverty wages to their workers here. So not only are they already avoiding paying millions of taxes, but now we're also subsidizing the income of their workers because they pay them so little that they qualify for all the different benefits like food stamps and housing programs. So we subsidize Burger King already to about $300 million a year. So they can certainly afford to pay their taxes, and we need to be strongly vigilant against Burger King or any other company that's going to move overseas. And so really we've got the issue of tax loopholes for where companies are outsourcing jobs. We've got the issue of inversion, where they're moving their headquarters. And we've got all these fancy loopholes that people maneuver their money around the world in this virtual money market just to avoid paying US taxes. While at the same time, we're cutting veterans' benefits. We're not taking care of our roads and our bridges. We're not building new schools and hospitals like we should be. And simply, it doesn't need to be this way. And there are more of us than there are of them. That's the thing to remember. There are more progressive people in this country than there are wealthy CEOs and ultra-rich people. So if all of us vote every time, not just presidential elections, but every election, we can change this. We can change everything that's wrong with this country if we voted every time. And so we've got to get out there. We've got to get the vote out this fall. This is an extraordinarily important opportunity we have right now. Joni Ernst cannot be our senator from Iowa, and it will be. It'll be on us. It'll be on the progressive movement of Iowa if we allow her to get elected. So don't let that be our legacy. Let's work our asses off, and let's move on into the caucuses and make sure we have a progressive presidential candidate coming out of Iowa too.
Jim hook Bernie up to the microphone here. And I'm going to say, now for the main attraction. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont is the longest-serving independent member of Congress in American history. He's been called a practical and successful legislator. His work has been focused on the shrinking middle class and widening income gap in America. A few items on his list of priorities are civil rights, reversing global warming, universal health care, fair trade policies, dental care, economy, Iraq and Afghanistan, supporting veterans. It might be easier to come up with the lists that are not his priorities. So we're going to turn this over to Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you. This is a wonderful turnout, and thanks very much for being here. And I want to thank the panelists for giving away half of my speech. I have nothing left to say. What we are going to do tonight is something that is very radical and does not happen very much in the United States of America. We're going to practice democracy. How's that? Instead of just watching a football game or the Major League final games, we're going to be talking about some of the most important issues facing America. And underlying everything that I'm going to be saying is that this country today, as everybody in this room knows and you have already heard, faces some enormously serious problems. In fact, I think it is fair to say that in America today, we face more serious problems than at any time since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And if you throw in, as you must, the planetary crisis of climate change, this may be a moment that tests the American people and the people of this world. And when we go to the doctor, if we're not feeling well, we don't want the doctor to slap us on the back or give us some quick talk. We want to know why we're not feeling well. We want to know what the problems are, and we want to have a course of action in order to rectify the problems. And I think that's what we have got to do in this nation. And unfortunately, that happens very, very rarely, because what we're doing now is pretty radical. We've come together to talk about the serious problems facing the country that we love. This does not happen terribly much. What happens is that people like me are on television and we're given 5 seconds to talk about the important issues facing America. Well, you know what? I can't do it. You can't do it in 5 seconds. So we need some serious discussion, and that's what we're going to do today. All right. What are the problems? Well, when you ask the American people, you say, what's going on? What is your major concern? What do they say? They say the economy. They say jobs. So what do they mean by that? Well, all of you know that in 2008, as a result of the greed, the recklessness, and the illegal behavior on Wall Street, this country was driven into the worst economic decline since the Great Depression. And as a result of that, millions of people lost their homes, millions of people lost their jobs, millions of people lost their life savings. Now, what the American people forget, because we have a pretty short memory, is that compared to where we were when George W. Bush left office in early 2009, we're in better shape today. In the end of 2008, all of you will remember that not only was the American financial system on the verge of collapse, so was the international financial system. There was a real threat, and Ben Bernanke, who was then chair of the Fed, recently testified or wrote something to the effect he was more worried about what was happening at that time than he thought took place during the Great Depression. There was a real fear that you were going to go to an ATM machine and nothing would come out. That's how close we were to a major financial collapse. When Bush left office, we were losing 700,000 jobs a month. People say job growth today is not strong. They're right. But it's a hell of a lot better to be growing a few 100,000 jobs than to be losing 700,000 jobs a month. And my Republican colleagues are always very, very worried about the deficit, but they forget that in Bush's last year, the deficit was $1.4 trillion. We have lowered that deficit by more than half. So what's the point? Are we in better shape today than we were when Bush left office? The answer is yes. And I think it's unfortunate that many Americans don't know that. But what the American people do know is that despite the modest gains that we've made in the last 6 years, the economy still is in very, very, very rough shape for the working class and the middle class of this country. That is the simple fact that cannot be swept under the rug. What's going on? What's going on is that real unemployment in America is not the 5.9% that you just read about in the papers. Real unemployment, and the government has these studies, is if you include people who have given up looking for work. In other words, they ask, are you actively looking for work? And the person says, no, there are no jobs available. They are not included in the official statistics. Are you working part-time when you want to work full-time? And most of the new jobs that are being created are part-time jobs. Well, if you're working 20 hours a week and you want to work 40 hours a week, guess what? You are not unemployed. When you add those factors in, real unemployment today is close to 12%, about 11.8%. That's phenomenally high. Youth unemployment, which we don't talk about at all, you know what youth unemployment is in America? It's 20%. And you heard a lot about Ferguson, Missouri, and the tragedy there of the shooting of an unarmed young man. African American youth unemployment in America is over 30%. So when you talk about the economy, the first thing people are worried about is, am I going to lose my job? Is it going to go to China? Is my kid going to have a job? The next thing that people understand is that real wages have gone down. Now, one of the interesting phenomenon of recent years is that we have all seen, as a result of exploding technology, increased worker productivity. Every worker in this room is producing substantially more than a worker who had the same job as you did 30 years ago, because of computers, because of robotics, because of all kinds of new technology. Now, one would think that in a rational world, if I gave you a tool that enabled you to produce 30% more than somebody who worked years ago, that either you would be making 30% more or you would be working significantly fewer hours. But what's happening? The answer is that despite the explosion of technology, the average American is working longer hours for lower wages. And that is why people are exasperated, and they're frustrated, and they are angry. When you talk about wages, I want you to know that since 1999, compared to today, median family income, that is that family right in the middle of the American economy, that family has seen a $5,000 reduction in their income. $5,000. If you're looking at wages, today, listen to this one. You want to see why these guys are angry, all these angry guys out there? The median male worker, that guy right in the middle of the economy, today, well, last year, made $780 less than he did 41 years ago, counted for inflation. Got that? So where we are now is the average male worker, not the average, the median male worker, $780 less than he was 41 years ago, despite the explosion of technology. For the typical female worker, the woman worker, she earned $1,300 less last year than she did in 2007. And the president recently gave a speech in the economy, and he made the right point. He said, look, I know that you're not feeling the gains. And you're not feeling the gains because while we have seen job growth, real income is not growing. New jobs being created today, and this is a huge, huge problem, pay 23% less than the jobs that we lost as a result of the recession. So we are gaining new jobs. But as you heard, many of those jobs cannot feed a family, cannot allow a family to live in dignity. Today, we have, and this is, again, something that we don't talk about, but is of huge concern to me, and I think to you. Today, we have 5.5 million kids, young people, who either graduated high school or dropped out of high school. And do you know what they're doing today? Nothing. They don't have jobs. They're hanging around on street corners in Vermont and Iowa. And that is one of the reasons that we have more people in jail in America than any other country on earth. Do you all know that? Because these kids got nothing. And here's a sad fact. If you graduate high school or you drop out of high school and you don't get a job first year, you don't get a job in the second year, you don't get a job in the third year, you guess what? It is likely you are never going to have a job in the mainstream economy. And what are you going to do? You're going to be dealing drugs, you're going to be doing crime, and you're going to end up in jail, or you may die from an overdose of drugs. So maybe, just maybe, we might be thinking about investing in our kids rather than in more and more jails. And that's a very important issue to me. Now, as Sue mentioned to you, I am the longest serving independent in the history of the Congress, which means that I kind of look at the world a little bit different than many of my colleagues. I caucus with the Democrats and I work very closely with many progressive Democrats, but I look at the world a little bit differently. And I kind of raise issues that sometimes other people aren't talking about. Let me talk about one of them. In the last 15 years, we have lost 60,000 factories in America. We've now taken it for granted. One of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that we have lost these factories and millions of decent paying jobs is a result of our disastrous trade policies. That's called NAFTA, CAFTA, Permanent Normal Trade Relations with China, and now they're trying to pass through a trade, TPP program, a Pacific Trade Agreement, which will also be a disaster. Now, where did these trade agreements come from? What was their goal? I was there when they were talking about NAFTA. The theory was if we had free trade with Mexico and China and all these low-wage countries, we would be producing all of these jobs in America. Think about all the products we'll sell to China. Anybody in their right mind believe that? A number of years ago, I was in China, and we went to a Walmart in China, which in many ways looks a lot like a Walmart in the United States. Different products, but it looks kind of like. And you got a lot of American products. They're all kind of soap products and sports products, you know. And I said to the guy there who was running the place, I said, just out of curiosity, I see you got all these American companies with their products here. How many of them are made in the United States? And he was very, very sheepish, and he said, well, 1%. And the answer is obvious. Of course they're going to manufacture those products in China where wages are infinitely low. So to my mind, when you go home tonight, you turn on the TV, you're going to have all of these ads telling you buy this and buy this and buy this, right? Well, don't you think maybe the time is overdue that some of these companies that want us to buy their products, maybe they might want to start reinvesting in America, building factories in this country so that our people can have decent paying jobs? Maybe that time is a little bit overdue. I think it is. I think you can understand the American economy very simply, where we are today, by looking at one fact. 25, 30 years ago, the largest private sector employer in America was a company called General Motors. Manufacturer of automobiles, a strong union, the UAW, decent wages, middle-class wages, and good benefits. That was the largest private sector employer in America. Who knows who the largest private sector employer in America is today? Walmart. You go from a GM economy to a Walmart economy. Walmart pays low wages, virtually no benefits, and is vehemently anti-union. And as you heard from, the gentleman was here, Chris, Walmart is owned by the Walton family, which just so happens to be the wealthiest family in the United States of America, worth about $148 billion. They're doing okay. And you are all no doubt delighted to be subsidizing this family because the wages and their benefits are so minimal that, as you heard, many of their people are on Medicaid, food stamps, and government-sponsored housing because they don't pay these people a living wage. So that is the transition of the economy from an economy that produced real products, i.e. automobiles, good wages, to an economy that now pays people minimal wages. Now, when we talk about education, here's something we should all be concerned about. We live in a highly globalized economy, very competitive economy. 30 years ago, the United States led the world in terms of the percentage of our people who graduated college. We were number one. Who knows what place we're in today? 12th place. And the reason for that is that in this country, the cost of college is increasingly non-affordable for working class and middle class families. You had hundreds of thousands of young people who would have the ability and the desire to go to college. They simply cannot afford to go to college. And then you got others who did go to college and who graduate college, and here in Iowa it's about the same as in Vermont. The average debt for kids graduating high school is about $29,000. A few months ago I had a meeting in Burlington, Vermont with folks who had student debt, talked to a young woman who was a physician. She went to medical school. You know what her debt is today? $300,000 for the crime of trying to become a primary care physician. All right? You got lawyers in my office who are $100,000 in debt. Now, some of you may have seen in the papers recently, maybe you didn't, that the last state in Germany to have tuition abolished tuition. And what they said is they want in Germany all kids, regardless of income, to be able to get a college education. Maybe there is something we can learn from Germany in that regard. Now, when we talk about the economy, what I think makes people very, very upset is that it's one thing to know that the middle class is disappearing. It's one thing to know that we have more people living in poverty today than almost any time in American history. It's one thing to know that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country. We know that. But then there's another reality going on. And the reality is that while the middle class disappears, while people in Vermont and Iowa and all over this country are working their fingers to the bone. I remember talking to a woman about a month ago in Vermont, and her husband is ill and can't work, and she has a couple of kids. She was working 5 jobs in order to cobble together health care and the kind of money she needs to take care of her family. Many people are working 3 jobs, 4 jobs. Now, while all of that is going on, while we see an increase in senior poverty, while we got over 1 million kids in this country who are homeless, while 1 out of 4 kids in this country gets their nutrition through food stamps, while all of that is going on, there is another reality taking place in America. And that is that the wealthiest people and the largest corporations have never had it so good. Corporate profits at an all-time high. When we talk about income and wealth inequality, this is an enormously important issue, and I talk about it a lot. And I'll tell you why I talk about it. I talk about it from a moral perspective. Are we as Americans comfortable about living in a country where so many people are poor at the same time as we are seeing a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires? Is that what we believe this country is about? And I think most Americans do not. So income and wealth inequality is a moral issue. What kind of nation are we? Are we comfortable being a nation where so few have so much and so many have so little? But it's not just a moral issue. It is an economic issue in this sense. And you made the point. I'm sorry, your first name is?
RESHONDA.
RESHONDA made this point. And that is, when you have an economy where almost all new income is going to the people on top, and tens of millions of people have no disposable income, how do you create jobs? And you said it exactly right, RESHONDA. If people can't have money in their pocket, they're not going to buy popcorn. They're not going to go out to eat. They're not going to buy products that their neighbors are manufacturing or selling. So unless people have income in their pockets, they can't spend money. And if they're not spending money, we're not creating jobs. So income and wealth inequality is an economic issue in addition to being a moral issue. There is just so much that the very rich can spend. And now it is increasingly a political issue, income and wealth inequality, because the billionaire class is not tucking their money underneath their mattress. The Koch brothers are now worth about $84 billion. In the last year alone, they saw a $12 billion increase in their wealth. Got that? 1 year. And they don't like Obama? If I made $12 billion more in a year, I'd be pretty happy. But they apparently think they could do better on the Republicans. All right. But be that as it may, here's the point. Obama and Mitt Romney both spend a little bit over $1 billion in their presidential campaigns. As a result of Citizens United, billionaires can now spend as much as they want. If you are the Koch brothers and your wealth increased by $12 billion in a year, $1 billion to you is like, $1 billion to them is like a cup of coffee for you. They could spend it. They could single-handedly take out of their own bank account more money than Barack Obama or Mitt Romney spent on their political campaigns, and they could use that in politics. So income and wealth inequality is a moral issue, it is an economic issue, and now as a result of Citizens United, it is a political issue as well. And that's where we are on that. Now, in terms of income, since 2008 and the Great Recession, 95% of all new income went to the top 1%. So you see in the papers about gross domestic product, how much growth we have had as an economy. Was it 2%? Is it 3%? Is it 4%? All of which is important. But for the average person, what difference does it make if almost all of the new income being generated goes to the top 1%? Top 1% now earns in a given year more than the bottom 50% in America. Now, in terms of wealth, what wealth is about is what we have accumulated after a lifetime of work. Listen to this. Today in America, the top 1% owns 38% of all of the wealth in America. 38%. Who wants to guess what the bottom 60% have. What's the guess? Answer is 1.7%. So if we have 100 people in this room, and we went out and we ordered some pizza, 100 slices of pizza, one person, very, very chubby no doubt, would have 38 slices, and 60 people would be sitting there with a microscope dividing up 1.7 pieces of pizza. That's where we are in terms of wealth in America. And I would argue to you very strongly that that situation is not sustainable. It is just not sustainable for a great economy and a great nation. The Walton family alone owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of American families. One family. I know that in Iowa, as we are in Vermont, you are concerned about education, making sure that we have an adequate number of teachers for our kids. Last year, the top 25 hedge fund managers made more than $24 billion. It's about $1 billion apiece on average. That is enough money to pay the full salaries of more than 425,000 public school teachers. 25 hedge fund managers, more money than 425,000 public school teachers. And we heard earlier about taxes in this country. Our corporate friends are just so upset about the tax structure. Back in 1952, corporations contributed about 32% of all revenue coming into America. Today, that number is less than 10%. 1 out of 4 large corporations in America pay 0 in federal income taxes, and we lose about $100 billion a year because these guys, you know what they're doing with their profits? Where do they put their profits? Think they're reinvesting in America, creating jobs, they're putting it in the Cayman Islands and in Bermuda and other tax havens in order to avoid paying taxes. All right, I've told you a little bit about the state of the economy. Now let me tell you what I think we should be doing. And everything that I'm going to tell you, and I want you all to understand this, this is not radical ideas. This is not fringe ideology. Everything I'm going to tell you is in fact what the vast majority of the American people want us to do, okay? Again, you go up to somebody and you say, Mrs. Jones, what's the most important issue for you? She'll say the economy and jobs. What do we need to do as a nation? What do the American people want us to do? They want a major federal jobs program to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, to make us more productive, and to create millions of good-paying jobs. That's what we can do. That's what we should do. An example. We spent an estimated $3 trillion fighting the war in Iraq, a war we should never have gotten into in the first place. And I'm not talking about the 6,700 lives that were lost in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'm not talking about the many hundreds of thousands of young men and women who came home with PTSD and TBI without arms and legs. I'm not talking about that. Just talking about $3 trillion. If we were conservative and decided to put $1 trillion into rebuilding our roads, our bridges, our rail system, our wastewater plants, our water systems, older schools, airports, $1 trillion of investment would create 13 million decent paying jobs. And in my view, that is exactly what we should be doing. When we talk about the economy, and you've heard this discussion again, when you look at the minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, recognize that that is not a minimum wage, it is a starvation wage. Now, I would go further, but we have a bill in Congress which is generating almost no Republican support that moves the minimum wage to a modest $10.10 an hour. If we were to do just that, we would give a pay increase to over 25 million Americans who need it the most. We would put money in their pocket, give them a little bit more dignity, and give them a little bit more spending money. We have got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And when we talk about work and wages, I hope everybody agrees that there is something profoundly wrong when women make 77 cents on the dollar compared to men. We need pay equity, equal pay for equal work. Now, you've already heard a little bit about Social Security. And let me chat about that a moment, because it's an issue that I have worked very, very hard on. Now, over the years, you have all no doubt heard people on TV getting up there and they say, we need entitlement reform. You ever hear that phrase? Yeah. All right, I want you all to understand. Whenever you hear the word entitlement reform, what it means is that the person who is talking is too cowardly to tell you the truth, because entitlement reform means cuts in Social Security and cuts in Medicare. That is exactly what they're talking about. Yep. And there are folks on Wall Street, for a variety of reasons, who want to either privatize Social Security completely or to cut benefits. Okay, that's what they want to do. So what you hear is several lies, and I can't use any other word, about Social Security. Here's lie number one. Social Security is going broke. We're going to have to cut benefits. What's the truth? Truth is Social Security has $2.5 trillion today in its Social Security trust fund, can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 19 years. If we want to expand that lifetime, 19 years means it's not going broke, but it's not long enough. What do? What we do is, and I hope all of you know this, right now, somebody is earning $5 million a year, somebody's earning $117,000 a year. They are both paying the same amount into the Social Security Trust Fund. If you lift that cap, something that your Senator Tom Harkin and I are working on, you could do two things. You can significantly extend the life of Social Security, not just 19 years, but 40 or 50 years, and you will have money left over to expand Social Security benefits, improve those benefits. There are millions of seniors in this country who are trying to get by on $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year. I don't know how they do it. And they do it by not eating enough, by not keeping warm enough, by having very, very difficult lives. And I think we owe it to them to expand Social Security for people with disabilities as well. Now, the other lie that you've heard about Social Security is that we have a large deficit, and therefore we have to cut Social Security. Well, I hope all of you understand that that is simply nothing to do with reality, in the sense that how do we fund Social Security? We fund Social Security because you have paid into the Social Security Trust Fund your entire life, 6.2% of your income, and your employer has put in 6.2%. That is the Social Security Trust Fund. Social Security hasn't added a nickel to the deficit. So what I am happy to tell you is some of us have worked very hard. We have beaten back some of the worst attacks on Social Security, but in the future, we should not be in a defensive mode. We should go on the offense and say, we need to expand Social Security benefits. Now, I want to touch on another issue which is of huge consequence. I am a member of both the U.S. Senate Environmental Committee and the U.S. Senate Energy Committee. And in that capacity, I hear from a lot of the leading scientists around the world. And in terms of climate change, this is what they say. And for them, there is no debate. The only place where there is a debate is Fox Television. In the real world, among the scientific community, that debate is long over. What do they say? One, Climate change is real. It is taking place in the United States, all over the world. Number two, climate change is significantly caused by human activity, that is carbon emissions, methane emissions. Number three, climate change today is already causing devastating problems. You're hearing about the water situation in California? That is a huge deal. Droughts throughout America, droughts throughout the world, heat waves around the world, rising sea levels, floods, extreme weather disturbances. You as taxpayers, and I voted for, spending $60 billion to help New Jersey and other states rebuild after Hurricane Sandy. The likelihood is we're going to see a lot more of those in the future unless we get our act together. So to my mind, one of the great embarrassments that we face, needless to say, as perhaps the most progressive member of the Senate, I have strong disagreements with my conservative Republican colleagues on a whole lot of issues. But what is to me not a disagreement, but an embarrassment, is you have a major political party that not only is not prepared to address the crisis of climate change, they refuse to even acknowledge the reality of climate change, the science of climate change. And let me tell you this, if the Republicans, and why your election here, and Braley's election is so terribly important, is who controls the Senate is going to come down to probably 1 or 2 votes. Can the Democrats get the 50, 51 that they need? We don't know that. It's about a 50-50 shot right now. If the Republicans gain control over the Senate, I expect, I may be wrong on this, that the chairman of the Senate Environmental Committee, which has oversight responsibilities on issues relating to climate, will be Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma. You know Jim Inhofe. Jim authored a book last year in which he referred to climate change as one of the great hoaxes ever perpetrated on the American people. This guy will be the chair of the Environmental Committee. Need I say more on that issue? That is why this election is so important. But bottom line, in terms of climate change, we have, in my view, a moral responsibility to our kids and our grandchildren, and I have 4 kids and 7 grandchildren, to leave them a habitable planet. And we can do it. We can do it. The technology is there. We know what we have to do, and the technology is evolving every day. We need to move boldly toward energy efficiency in terms of how we deal with our homes and buildings, how we deal with transportation. We know how to do it. And we have to move aggressively, and I know here in Iowa, you're big into wind, correct? All right, and congratulations for that. We're doing some of that in Vermont. We're doing a lot of solar in Vermont. We've got to move into solar. We have to move into geothermal. We have to move into the other technologies and energies that are out there. We can do this thing. We can do it if there's a political will. And the United States can lead the world. Move along China, move along India, move along Russia with new technologies. That is a moral responsibility that we have to, I think, address. Now, let me say this also. I want to talk a little bit about where we are as a nation politically, and what concerns me and should concern all of you very much. In the election, which we will have in a month, the political scientists estimate, they may be wrong and I hope they are, but they estimate that 60% of the American people will not be voting in this election. Okay? So you live in a democratic society, 60% of the people, for one reason or another, don't vote. And in those 60% that don't vote, my guess is that 70 to 80% of low-income workers do not vote, and equally 70 to 80% of young people under 21 will not vote. So here you are living in a quote-unquote democracy where the majority of the people don't vote. And then, at the same time, the billionaire class is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to buy the elections. People don't vote, billionaires buying elections. And that is a very dangerous dynamic. So what our job needs to be, it seems to me, and I know that I don't have to preach to you because you're already doing it, is to do everything that we can to explain to people what democracy is about, what people fought and died for, and that is for them to be participating in the political process. If we can increase voter turnout from the projected 40% to 50%, and that is not a radical vision, imagining getting half of the people to vote in an enormously important election. Wow, that is pretty radical, huh? If you could do that, the Democrats will probably gain seats in the Senate and probably retake the U.S. House of Representatives. If the voter turnout is 40%, who knows what will happen? Yes, ma'am.
I happen to have sheets here so people can sign up for that, because I knew that you would suggest that.
Okay, please sign up. And you're going to put them to work, right?
I will.
Okay. But that is exactly what we need to do. We need to knock on doors. We need to register people to vote. We need to get people to vote early. We need to do that. Now, what is going on? You know, I know that a lot of people, especially younger people, and this is very disturbing, think that politics is, if I can use the word, bullshit. It's a waste of time. Why would I bother thinking about voting? How silly can you be to waste your time voting, right? I know all that stuff. But these young people are so wrong. Because what happens in Washington impacts their lives in so many ways. Koch brothers understand that. They're not stupid. They don't think politics is irrelevant. They're trying to buy the political system. They're going to spend $300, $400, $500 million. They think it's pretty important. Our neighbors should also think it is pretty important. Now, why do the Koch brothers, worth $84 billion, why are they going to spend $300 or $400 million on this election? What do they want?
They want to be worth 160.
Well, that's right. That's right. But this is, and here's something, and the media doesn't talk about this terribly much, if at all. In 1980, David Koch ran for Vice President of the United States on the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party that he helped fund had a platform. And their platform called not for cuts in Social Security, the elimination of Social Security. Not for cuts in Medicare or Medicaid, the elimination of Medicare and Medicaid. Not for cuts in the Postal Service, the elimination of the Postal Service, the elimination of the Environmental Protection Agency, the elimination of the U.S. Department of Energy, the ending of public education and federal aid to education. You got money? Good. You could send your kids to a private school. We don't need public schools in America, and certainly we don't need great universities like the University of Iowa. We shouldn't have the government involved in public education. Their ideology is an extreme right-wing ideology, which essentially wants to repeal every piece of legislation passed since the 1930s that protect the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. And I knew some of you are thinking, well, he's really exaggerating. I am not exaggerating. Now, I'm not telling you that every Republican candidate believes that. That is not the case. But for the people who are funding these campaigns, that is their ideology. They want to take us back to a time in the 1920s where working people had no rights. What the struggle of the last 80 years were rights. You're a worker. You want the right to be able to form a union. You're a woman. You want the right not to be discriminated against. You are an elderly person. You want the right to be able to have health insurance when you are sick. You are somebody who is concerned about the drinking water that your kids are absorbing. You want the right to know that corporations can't pollute your water because we have strong environmental protection laws. All of that stuff they want disappearing. And they want to bring us back to a time when a handful of the wealthiest people in this country not only controlled the economy, but had everybody dependent upon them. If you're old and you're sick, what they believe is not that you have a right to health care, but maybe, and they're very explicit about this, maybe some charity or church will help you out, or maybe they won't. You are on your own completely. They want a world dominated by the billionaire class. They want to go further than Citizens United. What Citizens United says, Billionaires can now spend as much as they want, but they can't give more than a certain amount directly to the candidate. They want to eliminate that. They want to be able to have a room like this, and this is what they are fighting for. A room like this where you have candidates from all over, Republican candidates from all over the country. You want to run for the Senate from Minnesota? Here's your check for $50 million, right out. Here is what you're going to be saying. There's your media consultant. There's your think tank, and you're working for me. No ifs, buts, and maybe. That is their idea of democracy, literally funding. And $50 million for them is a cup of coffee for you. It's nothing. Not when you made $12 billion, increased your wealth by $12 billion in 1 year. That is their vision of the future of America. The media doesn't write about it. Media talks about how the Koch brothers are spending a whole lot of money, but they don't tell you what they believe. And that is what they believe. Now, people may say, well, they wrote that in 1980. Is that what they believe today? The answer is yes. They got all these think tanks. These are the issues they're working on. Ending public education. Minimum wage, they're not opposed to raising the minimum wage. They want to end the concept of the minimum wage so that in high unemployment areas, employers can hire people for $3 or $4 an hour. That is what they want, and more Republicans are moving in that direction. So that is where we are politically. That's what's going on right now. When people say, well, in Congress, why can't these guys get along? It's not a personality conflict. It is a huge ideological division. And on all of these issues, these guys represent a handful of the American people. But because of their money, they're able to be very significant in the political process. That's where we are. Now let me conclude by saying this. These are tough times for the country, and I know that people are very, very demoralized. They're looking around. They're unhappy with what goes on in Washington. They're unhappy with going on in their state legislature. They're disgusted by the greed of Wall Street and corporate America, and they're throwing up their hands. And they're saying, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I got to worry about my kids. That's it. I'm not going to deal with these big issues anymore. This is what I want to tell you. In these very difficult times, let's not forget how change comes about. I want to talk about a few things. If we were sitting in this room 30 years ago, and somebody was to say, you know, I think America has come a long way or will come a long way in overcoming racism in the country. And I think maybe in the year 2008, we'll elect an African American as president, maybe re-elect them in 2012. If you were in this room 30 years ago and you bet on that, you'd be a millionaire today, because nobody would have believed that was possible. It happened, and Iowa helped make it happen, okay? In other words, not that we have overcome racism in America, God knows we have not, but we have got to pat ourselves on the back. We have come a significant way where people are now voting for a candidate not based on his or her color, but on the views that he or she is representing. No small thing. Look at the issue of women's rights. 25 years ago, if my memory is correct, there were 2 women in the United States Senate. Today there are 20, and my guess is that in 15, 20 years, half or more of the Senate will be women, okay? When I was mayor of Burlington, Vermont, I did something incredibly radical in the 1980s. I appointed the first woman police officer. Whoa, what a big deal that was. And now you laugh because we have overcome so many of those barriers in terms of women's economic opportunity. And that is a good thing that we should be proud of. Look at issue of disability rights. When I was growing up and a family had a kid who was disabled, there was an embarrassment in the family. That child was put in some institution. That child was not seen in public. That child was stigmatized. We have changed that. We still have a long way to go, to be sure. But because of work done by people like your Senator, Tom Harkin, and others, we have integrated people with disabilities into the mainstream of American life. That is a huge step forward. And last but not least, if we were sitting in this room 10 years ago, not a long time ago, 10 years ago, and somebody said, you know, I think that you're going to have conservative states in America that probably will approve gay marriage. If you said that 10 years ago, people would have thought you were totally crazy. But that debate is now over, all right? People in this country, conservative states, progressive states, have said that we are going to end discrimination against people based on their sexual orientation. And for the young people in this country, they don't even know what the issue is anymore. Grandparents do, but the kids think it's perfectly normal. Why am I telling you all of these things? I'm telling you all of these things because change does take place. All of those changes that I described, and many I have not talked about, are huge transformations of the United States of America, making us a much, much less discriminatory society. Do we have further work to do in those areas? Yes. Have we made real progress? Yes, and we should be proud of what we've accomplished. But having said that, what I will tell you is there's one area where we not only have not made progress, we have lost ground, and that is the economic struggle, the disparity between the very rich and everybody else, the decline of the middle class, too many kids and others living in poverty. And this struggle is a tough one, because the Koch brothers, to answer your question, you would think that if you had $84 billion, you could probably live pretty comfortably. You could probably have 100, 200 homes, 500 cars, 8 yachts. You could probably live pretty comfortably. But for whatever reason, and I honestly believe that you're talking here about a psychiatric issue, in the sense that many of us know people who have alcohol problems, right? And it is very difficult for those people to stay away from alcohol. They struggle every day. And we've known people who have drug problems and the addictive impact that drugs have on our lives. These people have a problem. It's a sickness of greed, of never-ending greed. They need more and more and more. And they are prepared to destroy the American middle class to get more. Now, I think that is a sickness, to be honest with you. But that is where we are, and they have incredible wealth and incredible power. That is the struggle we are engaged in right now, and it's a tough struggle. But if we stand together, if we don't let peripheral issues divide us, we can beat them. And I will tell you this, as somebody who has 7 grandchildren, for the future of this country, for our kids and our grandchildren, we have got to win this struggle. It is the future of America, and working together, we can do just that. So I want to thank you all very much for being here tonight. Let me thank you all very, very much. We have been to Iowa a couple of times. I was talking to Phil, stand up. Phil works with me. And Sophie Castle works in my office in Washington. She's from Grinnell, Iowa. So she's following us around a little bit. And I got to tell you, I love the people of Iowa. You're very much like the people in Vermont, down to earth, good people. And I thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you.
There are definitely a lot of important issues talked about tonight, and hopefully it'll inspire many Iowans to act on the many problems facing our nation today. Thank you for watching. I'm Callie BRETTHAUER in your neighborhood on your neighborhood network, PATV Channel 18.